Why don't more champions scale off of premium stats like Pyke and Lethality? Wouldn't this stop a lot of classes from building weird, problematic items? Boobadoo, it's a good question. Question is like, hey, why don't you just do more bespoke scalings? I can give you my personal opinion on this, and I do want to note this one's definitely coming from a personal opinion, and that is, I generally don't like doing weird scalings on a character unless there's like a very specific purpose behind it. So like as an example, in the case of Pyke, I think his weird scalings are good because he's a very unique character that has to be in an item system that doesn't work for him. Specifically, we want him building lethality, but he's a support. So he doesn't have the income to build lethality, and he honestly has the kit that says, I want to build full tank. And so we have to do a lot of weird scalings on Pyke to get him working the way he needs to, because it turns out there just aren't really any AD support items built to make Pyke make sense. So his kit needs to do it for him. So in cases like that, I think it's generally pretty good. That said, I am personally cautious as a designer about doing weird scalings because I often find the result of them is the designer basically like slapping someone on the hand and saying, you'll do what I want instead of what you want. And I personally, as a designer, like it when there's like some creativity potential in an item build and a player can be like, I'm building this because I think it's good and not because I'm being actively forced to by the designer. And so, you know, sometimes we'll see things in development where it'll be like, I really want this character to build cooldown reduction, and so I'm going to make all their damage scale with cooldown reduction. Like we've had tests like that where a character in development has a bunch of CDR scalers on their spells. And it's like, on one hand, yes, that works. If you want them building CDR, you can give them CDR ratios to really make sure it happens. But on the other hand, to me, it can feel kind of like restrictive and a little boring, where it's like CDR already gives you something. CDR gives you cooldowns. It's already a stat that gives you a thing. And so by doubling down on it, by making like a CDR ratio, I think a lot of times what just ends up happening is it feels like you're like forcing players to get like a specific thing, which maybe isn't always correct. The item system, I think, is like broad enough that most characters can find places for them in the item system without having to do like really, really heavy-handed stuff. And again, there's a few that can't, like Pyke and Senna as examples. They need heavy-handed stuff because the support item system isn't designed for them. But I think generally speaking, you don't need to do crazy stuff to make your character like fit into the item system. The item system tends to be like designed to welcome others in, to welcome people into buying their scalings. And I think sometimes if you do crazy stuff, it can feel like the designer is like forcing your hand to do something that like maybe you want to do, maybe you don't. Now, all that said, again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do weird scalings or can't do them. Like, I say this, but I've even done them myself. Like, as an example, Jhin has weird scalings, and he has weird scalings because I wanted to let him build crit. Because without weird scalings, half the crit items wouldn't make sense on him because he wouldn't know what to do with attack speed. Right? And so Jin's a character who needed weird scalings to build crit. And technically, giving your character on hits is a weird scaling, which I did with Viego because I wanted to build Blade of the Ruin King, right? So I'd say weird scalings like lethality ratios or on hits or crit scalers or whatever, they can be very effective at making sure your character has a item build that fits in with the rest of the roster and feels fun and cool and very like enjoyable. That's definitely like a real thing. You just always got to be careful that like you're doing it to get a good result for your character, as opposed to like maybe having the character feel like forced into like very specific things that they may or may not want. So yeah, that's kind of the thought there. It's not ideal. Why are unskilled, boring champions getting constant buffs? Oh, I was wondering why this guy was banned, and then I realized that he didn't stop when he was ahead. So I'm gonna answer this question because I think it's an important question, even though the person who asked it definitely deserves to be banned. And that is, the question was like, why are boring champions getting buffs and champs like, high skill champions aren't. So first of all, we do buff high skill champions. We buff Lee Sin, as an example, a lot. And it is important that there are many, many different ways to be good at and succeed at League of Legends. And so just because Malphite is easy does not mean he should be weak. Because some people want to engage with League of Legends by playing Malphite. On the flip side of things, it's probably important that Yasuo is some degree of strong, so if you really want to invest in Yasuo and get really good at him, you'll be able to pop off, right? But I think gatekeeping who's allowed to be successful or good at League of Legends, the long-term result of that is League of Legends becomes a very constricted and small player base that everybody starts losing. And so there is very high value in having simple characters that are good and hard characters that are good. They all should be good. Now, should Yuumi be the best champion you can play in Challenger? No. But I think it's totally reasonable for a character like Garen to be viable for 90% of the player base. I think that is a totally reasonable thing that creates a character that a number of players would not be able to enjoy the game without, right? If every character was Yasuo, there'd be a lot of players who wouldn't be interested in playing League of Legends. And this is coming very much from the perspective of when League is a strong, healthy, and diverse game with a strong, healthy, and diverse set of players, everybody wins. Because matchmaking gets better because there's more players, because we do things like Worlds, which is always hype if you're a League player. It means they can, support the team that it takes to make Swarm, and then if you're a League player, you get to play Swarm in the summer. Right? It's not just I want players playing League. It's League competitive multiplayer games tend to get better and be healthier and more enjoyable when they have a large, diverse group of people who enjoy them. Another way you can think about it is the social aspect of things, where it tends to be a lot cooler to play a competitive game if your friends play it. It tends to be a lot cooler to play a competitive game if your friends think you are cool for playing it. Which, depending on the time and the place, it can be cool to be Diamond in League. Just depends, right? It tends to be a lot better to play a competitive game if, maybe you could find someone you were interested in who played it, right? I think Valorant gets a lot of benefit from being an e-dater game to some degree. People like playing games together. And so by having a game that, appeals to all these different player types, I generally think that makes everybody who plays it win to some degree. And so I generally don't agree with the arguments where it's there's only one way to play League of Legends and this is how it should be and no one else deserves to succeed unless they do this specific thing. I think that's a good way to set the game on the path to being not all that fun. So, yeah.